They said I'd ruin the wedding if I showed up. My stepmother swore I'd bring shame to the family, but what she did that night, ripping my dress in front of hundreds, became her biggest mistake, because the man she tried to humiliate me in front of was the one who owned everything she worshipped. My name is Vivian, and this is the story of how my stepmother tried to destroy me at my brother's wedding, and how karma arrived wearing a tailored suit. Before I tell you how humiliation turned into victory, hit that subscribe button, because by the end, you'll believe in poetic justice. I grew up believing silence was the price of peace. After my mother passed away, my father remarried a woman named Claudia, a woman who could turn kindness into weakness and affection into ammunition. She arrived in our house wearing perfume that smelled like money and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. At first, I wanted to believe she could fill the emptiness my mother left behind. I even called her Mom once. She turned to me with that icy smile and said, "Don't call me that. You already have a mother, or at least, you did." That was the day I learned how cruelty can hide behind lipstick and pearls. From that moment on, my place in the house changed. Claudia's son Ethan could do no wrong. He got the newest gadgets, private tutors, even a car before he could drive. I, on the other hand, was treated like an inconvenience my father forgot to deal with. My meals were separate, my clothes were hand-me-downs, and my achievements, no matter how small, were dismissed as luck. "You should thank Ethan," Claudia would say. "He's the reason you still have a roof over your head." My father never corrected her. He'd look at the floor, swirling the ice in his glass, pretending not to hear. That silence broke something in me. It told me I'd never be enough. Not for her, not for him, not for anyone who thought money decided worth. By the time I turned 18, I'd learned to disappear. I left home the day after graduation with a single suitcase and $200 in my pocket. I didn't look back. Life outside that house wasn't easy, but at least it was mine. I worked double shifts as a waitress, studied at night, and promised myself I'd never depend on anyone again. I rented a tiny apartment with a leaky ceiling and made it feel like home with cheap fairy lights and thrift store curtains. I wasn't rich, but I was free. And sometimes, that's worth more than gold. That's where I met Daniel. He came into the cafe one rainy night, drenched and laughing because his umbrella had turned inside out. He wasn't like the people I'd known growing up. No arrogance, no need to prove himself. He talked to me like my thoughts mattered. We started sharing coffee breaks, then stories, then dreams. I thought he was just another ordinary man trying to make it through life. He never mentioned money, and I never asked. I didn't fall in love with what he had. I fell in love with the way he saw me, like I wasn't invisible. We married quietly, in a small garden behind the courthouse, surrounded by flowers and laughter. No family, no drama, no spotlight. Just us. He gave me a simple silver ring and said, "You don't need the world to see your worth. You just need to see it yourself." At the time, I had no idea how literal those words would become. Years passed peacefully, until one afternoon, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. My heart sank the moment I saw the handwriting, elegant, cold, unmistakable. It was from Claudia. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Ethan Reynolds and Charlotte Davis," it read, embossed in gold. For a moment I thought it was a joke. Why invite the family disappointment to a wedding that would probably be covered in luxury magazines? But at the bottom of the invitation, in neat cursive letters, was a note. "Do make sure to wear something appropriate this time." Daniel found me staring at it. "You don't have to go," he said gently. "They've done enough damage." I wanted to agree, to throw the invitation away and never think about it again. But something inside me, maybe pride, maybe the ghost of the girl who once cowered in that house, refused to hide. "I'll go," I said quietly. "Not for them." For me, Daniel smiled, that calm, knowing smile of his. "Then I'm coming with you." I shook my head. "You don't know what they're like, Daniel." "They'll pick you apart, the way they do everything that doesn't fit their picture-perfect world." He just chuckled softly. "Vivian, I've spent my life watching people pretend." I think I can handle your family. I didn't realize then what that meant. To me, Daniel was still the man who fixed his own car, cooked dinner, and insisted on doing the dishes. I didn't know he owned the company that supplied half the luxury venues in the city. He'd never told me because he didn't want his world to change the way I saw him. In the days leading up to the wedding, I could feel old memories clawing their way back. I tried on my dress, a soft shade of peach with delicate lace along the sleeves, and stared at my reflection. It wasn't expensive, but it was beautiful. It was me. And for once, that felt like enough. Daniel came up behind me, kissed my shoulder, and whispered, "You look like peace." But deep down, I knew peace wasn't what awaited me. Claudia's world thrived on appearances, and I was still the girl she'd tried to erase. As we packed our bags, a quiet unease settled over me, like a storm waiting behind the clouds. I kept thinking about the last time I'd seen her, the way she'd looked at me like I was dirt she couldn't sweep away. I remembered her words, "You'll never amount to anything, Vivian. Some people are born to serve, not to shine." Those words used to break me, but as Daniel took my hand before we left, I realized something had changed. I wasn't that scared girl anymore. I'd built a life out of the ashes she left behind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wedding wasn't just a reunion. It was a test, a final act in a play I hadn't agreed to be part of. I had no idea that by the end of that night, Claudia's empire of cruelty would crumble in front of the very people she was trying to impress, and the woman she once called worthless would become the name on everyone's lips. I'll never forget the way the air felt that morning, heavy with perfume, arrogance, and the faintest trace of fake smiles. Ethan's wedding was held at one of those sprawling estates with white marble floors, fountains that never stopped running, and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in palaces. Everything about it screamed money, the kind of money Claudia worshipped. When Daniel and I arrived, every head turned. Not in welcome, more like curiosity, like they were wondering who had let me in. Claudia stood at the top of the grand staircase, dripping in diamonds, her hair pulled into a perfect twist. The moment her eyes found me, her smile faltered just slightly before returning sharper than glass. "Well," she said loudly, so everyone could hear, "you actually showed up." I wasn't sure you'd have the courage after everything. That one word carried years of insults, reminders that I didn't belong, that I was the scar on her perfect picture. I forced a smile. "It's Ethan's day. I came for him." She gave a small, mocking laugh. "How noble of you." Her gaze slid to Daniel, scanning him from head to toe. "And this must be your husband?" The pause was deliberate, like the word itself was an insult. "I must say you've done better than I expected. Though I hope he's not the one who picked your dress." Her friends chuckled. My peach dress suddenly felt too plain, too fragile under the weight of their judgment. Daniel started to speak, but I squeezed his hand lightly. "Don't," I whispered. I wasn't going to give her a show. The ceremony itself was picture perfect. The bride, Charlotte, looked stunning. Ethan looked happy in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. For a moment, I let myself forget where I was, who surrounded me, and just admired the beauty of two people starting something new. But peace doesn't last long in a house built on control. After the vows, we moved into the reception hall. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter filled the air, and I stayed quietly at the corner table with Daniel. I could feel Claudia's eyes on me even when she wasn't looking. She thrived on pretending to ignore me while making sure everyone else didn't. When it came time for the family photo, I hoped she'd overlook me. I would have been fine watching from the side, but Claudia had other plans. "Vivian," she called out, her voice cutting through the music like a blade. "Come, we'll take one big family photo." Reluctantly, I walked toward the stage. The photographer tried to organize everyone, placing Ethan and Charlotte in the center, Claudia beside them, and me at the far end. Just as he was about to snap the picture, Claudia said, "Wait. Could we get her to step back a little? She's ruining the symmetry." A few guests laughed under their breath. The photographer hesitated. "Ma'am, I think—" No, she insisted. waving him off. It's fine. Vivian understands. She's always known her place. My throat tightened. I could feel everyone watching, some uncomfortable, others entertained. I forced a smile and stepped aside, but apparently even that wasn't enough. She leaned closer, her voice a low hiss. You should have stayed home, Vivian. No one wanted you here. You embarrass us. Daniel took a step forward, but I shook my head. My eyes burned, but I refused to give her tears. I didn't come here for you, I said quietly. Something in my calm tone must have angered her. Maybe she hated that I wasn't breaking. Because the next thing I knew, she grabbed my wrist hard and yanked me closer. Don't talk back to me, she snapped, loud enough for half the room to hear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I tried to pull free, but she wouldn't let go. The sound of fabric tearing echoed across the hall. My sleeve ripped clean off. For a moment, time stopped. I stared at her, at my torn dress, at the crowd frozen in shock. Then she pointed toward the exit. Get out, she shouted. You've humiliated this family for the last time. Guards, remove her. The two security men looked uncertain, glancing between us. The bride's smile had vanished. Ethan stood frozen, whispering something to Claudia, but she brushed him off. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, whispers snaking through the air. Some pitied me, others smirked behind champagne glasses. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Daniel finally stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. Let go of her, he said. Claudia's eyes flicked toward him, full of disdain. And who exactly do you think you're talking to? This is a private family matter. You're lucky we even let you through the door. He didn't move, just stared at her. Let her go. For a moment, the silence in that room was unbearable. Then she scoffed and turned to the guards. Do your job! One of them hesitated. Ma'am, maybe we should— Now! She barked. They took a step toward me, and I felt Daniel's hand reach for mine. Before I could speak, a deep voice boomed from the entrance. Is this how you treat your guests? Every head turned. The sound of polished shoes echoed across the marble floor. The room shifted, people whispering, the atmosphere changing in an instant. Daniel released my hand and walked forward, his tone steady and cold. I was told this was a celebration, not a public spectacle. Claudia blinked. Excuse me? Who do you think you are to speak to me that way? He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. You'll find out soon enough. The entire room fell silent. Even the band stopped playing. And for the first time since I was a child, I saw fear flicker across Claudia's perfectly made-up face. Because something told me. This wasn't just my moment of humiliation anymore. It was the beginning of hers. For a moment, nobody moved. The entire room froze in that uneasy silence that comes right before a storm. I could still feel the torn fabric clinging to my arm, my heart pounding in my chest, my dignity hanging by a thread. Claudia stood with her chin high, confident that she'd won again, that she'd finally put me back in my place. But then Daniel spoke, his tone low, even, and terrifyingly calm. Who touched my wife? Every whisper, every gasp in that ballroom stopped cold. Wife. That one word rolled through the air like thunder. People exchanged stunned glances. Claudia blinked in disbelief, then let out a mocking laugh. Your wife? She said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, maybe you should buy her a proper dress next time, something that doesn't tear so easily. Her friends snickered behind her like a pack of trained parrots. Daniel's expression didn't change. He slowly reached into his suit pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed a single button. Within seconds, 2 men in black suits entered the hall, men I didn't recognize, but who walked straight toward Daniel like soldiers waiting for orders. The color drained from Claudia's face as she realized this wasn't some random man she could mock. Mr. Westbrook, we didn't expect you so soon, one of them said. The room went silent again. Mr. Westbrook. The name landed like a weight in the air. People started whispering in shock. Claudia's hand dropped from my torn sleeve. She looked at him, blinking rapidly, the confidence draining from her eyes. Westbrook? As in, Westbrook Industries? She stammered. Daniel nodded once. That's right. Then his voice turned icy. And if I'm not mistaken, this entire property, the catering, the decor, the security, even the media coverage, is managed by one of my subsidiaries. So technically, he took a slow step toward her. You just humiliated your own sponsor's wife. Gasps rippled through the guests like waves. Ethan looked pale, the bride covered her mouth, and even the photographer stopped breathing. Claudia tried to recover, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I didn't mean. Daniel raised a hand, silencing her. No, you meant every word. He turned to the guards who had been seconds away from dragging me out. You can escort her out instead. For a moment, they hesitated, as if unsure they'd heard right. Then one of them nodded. Yes, sir. Claudia stumbled back, her voice rising. You can't do this. This is my son's wedding, my family. Your family, Daniel interrupted sharply, should be ashamed of how they allowed this. He turned to the crowd, his voice cutting through the room like steel. Let this be a lesson. Status means nothing when you've lost your humanity. I stood there, frozen, watching the woman who'd made my life miserable for years being escorted toward the door. She tried to resist, shouting empty threats about lawsuits and connections, but nobody dared look her in the eye. Guests whispered in disbelief, recording everything on their phones. For once, I wasn't the one people were whispering about. Daniel removed his suit jacket and gently wrapped it around my shoulders. You okay? He asked softly. His eyes, usually warm, now carried a storm I'd never seen before. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said quietly. I did. The bride, Charlotte, stepped forward hesitantly. Mrs. Westbrook, I'm so sorry. We had no idea her sincerity was real, her eyes full of guilt. I gave her a small nod. It's not your fault, I said. Some people mistake cruelty for class. Ethan finally found his voice. Vivian, I didn't know she'd. Daniel cut him off with a look that made Ethan falter. You let her. That's enough. The band didn't dare play. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, gone. The only sound was the heavy beating of silence. Claudia's voice echoed faintly from outside, screaming at the guards, but even that faded into the night. Daniel turned back to me. You're leaving with your head high, he said, holding out his hand. Not as the girl they pitied, but as the woman they'll never forget. We walked out together, past the marble staircase where Claudia had first greeted us, past the shocked faces that now looked at me with awe instead of disdain. Outside, the air was cool and quiet, the night sky wide and endless. When we reached the car, Daniel opened the door for me, then paused, his voice low. You know, he said, I was planning to keep my last name hidden a little longer. I smiled faintly. So much for that plan. He laughed, the tension breaking for just a second. She deserved to know who she was dealing with. Then he looked at me, his tone softening. But more importantly, you deserve to see what it feels like to be protected. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching him in silence. The man who had stood up for me, not because of pride or anger, but because he couldn't stand seeing me hurt. As we drove away, the glow of the mansion faded behind us. I could almost feel the shift, the balance of power finally changing after years of silence. For so long, Claudia had made me feel small. But that night, she was the one who was diminished, stripped of the only thing she valued, control. I looked at Daniel and whispered, You turned humiliation into justice. He smiled without taking his eyes off the road. No, he said softly. You did that the moment you walked in there with your head held high. I leaned back in my seat, feeling the last of the old pain loosen its grip. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was free. Inside that grand mansion, they might still be whispering my name, but now it carried a different weight. Not the weight of shame, the weight of power. The next morning, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages, calls, and notifications poured in faster than I could read them. At first, I thought it was just gossip spreading within the family circle. But when I opened one of the links, I froze. That was the headline. Beneath it, a picture of me, standing in Daniel's jacket, my torn dress still visible. Claudia's stunned expression caught mid-scream behind me. The video had already gone viral. Millions of people were commenting, sharing, dissecting every second of that moment. Some called it karma, others called it bravery. But all I could think was how strange it felt to finally be seen. For years, Claudia made me invisible. Now, the world was watching her downfall. By noon, my father showed up at our apartment. He looked older, smaller somehow, like the weight of silence had finally caught up to him. For a long time, he just stood in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably, unable to meet my eyes. "Vivian," he said finally. "I didn't know she'd go that far." I looked at him carefully. "You didn't stop her either." He exhaled, guilt flickering across his face. "You were always stronger than I realized," he whispered. "Your mother would have been proud." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get, and honestly, it was enough. News about Claudia spread fast. Her perfect image crumbled overnight. Sponsors dropped her from every charity board she clung to. Clients canceled partnerships, afraid to be associated with the woman who humiliated a billionaire's wife on camera. Her social circle, the same people who used to laugh at her jokes, suddenly disappeared. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't need to. Life had already done that for me. Ethan reached out a few days later. When I saw his name flash on my phone, I hesitated before answering. "Vivian," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know she planned any of that." I sighed. "You didn't stop her either." He was silent for a long moment. "I know. I should have, but you didn't deserve it." None of it I believed him. Ethan had always been kind in his own quiet way, just too scared to stand up to her. "Take care of your wife," I said softly before hanging up. "Don't let her become your mother." After that, I didn't hear from them again. The mansion, the family name, the wealth, it all faded into noise I no longer cared about. Meanwhile, Daniel and I focused on something that actually mattered. We used part of his company's charity wing to rebuild my mother's old dream, a women's foundation she once wanted to start before she died. We called it Grace House after her. It became a refuge for women who'd faced what I had, humiliation, abuse, abandonment, but still chose to stand tall. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the golden light filled our living room, I sat beside Daniel, watching the news mention the opening of Grace House. My name flashed across the screen, not as the poor stepdaughter, but as Vivian Westbrook, co-founder and director. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like closure. Daniel reached over, intertwining his fingers with mine. "You know," he said, smiling softly, "I think your stepmother taught you something important." I looked at him, half smiling. "What's that?" "How not to become her." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "Yeah, I guess she did." Outside, the city lights began to glow, and I thought back to that night at the wedding. The look on her face when the truth hit her, the moment power shifted without a single scream from me. That's when I realized something. I didn't win because Daniel was powerful. I won because I stopped needing her approval. Power isn't about money or status or owning a mansion full of chandeliers. It's about walking away from the people who try to break you and never letting them see you shatter. A week later, a letter arrived at our office. It was from Claudia. The handwriting was shaky, the tone bitter but desperate. She said she wanted to meet, to clear the air. I read it once and folded it neatly back into the envelope. Daniel watched me. You're not going to respond, are you? I smiled faintly. No. Some people don't deserve closure. They deserve silence. He nodded, proud. That's my girl. That night, as I stood on our balcony overlooking the city, a soft wind brushed against my face. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stood trembling in a torn dress, surrounded by laughter and judgment. She didn't exist anymore. She'd been replaced by someone stronger, calmer, and untouchable. People still whispered about that wedding sometimes. They'd talk about the billionaire who walked in and turned humiliation into history. But that's not how I remember it. I remember the quiet strength it took to stay standing. I remember the look in Daniel's eyes when he said, "You'll never be disrespected again." And I remember the moment I realized I didn't need anyone's approval to know my worth. That's the real story. Not revenge, redemption. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't what you do to them. It's the peace you give yourself when you finally let them go. That night taught me something. When people rip you apart to feel powerful, don't fight back with rage. Fight back with truth. Let them see who you really are, and they'll destroy themselves. If you've ever been shamed by someone who thought you were beneath them, remember this. Your silence is not weakness. It's preparation. Hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more tales of karma, power, and redemption. Because respect is earned in silence and returned in thunder.